Graham stood in our bedroom doorway with his dress shirt still crisp, his cufflinks catching the lamp while my fever made the ceiling tilt. I had been waiting for medicine from the pharmacy, something ordinary enough to prove he still remembered I was human. Instead, he held a thick envelope between two fingers and dropped it onto my blanket like it already disgusted him. "I brought the cure for both of us," he murmured. And the first page showed a separation agreement with my name printed too cleanly. I tried to lift the papers, but my hands shook so badly the corners scraped against my wrist. Graham stayed near the dresser, not close enough to touch me, not far enough to hide the satisfaction on his face. "You need to be out before morning, Meredith, because Brooke is coming here this weekend," he said, as if he were rescheduling dinner. My throat burned when I whispered, "You are doing this while I can barely stand?" His smile thinned, and he answered, "That is why I need this finished now." He began naming the house, the dining room, the furniture, and the life he believed had risen from his talent alone. Every word landed harder because I knew how many doors I had opened for him quietly. "Then let him walk through first. Take whatever actually belongs to you," he added, glancing at my robe on the chair. "So that should not take long." I looked at the envelope, then at the man who had mistaken my restraint for emptiness, and asked, "Are you sure this is how you want to end it?" Graham left 10 minutes later, carrying his victory back to Brooke before the driveway lights had even gone dark. I did not scream after him, "Throw the papers," or leave one broken thing he could later turn into proof against me. I reached into the sewing box beside my bed, beneath folded needles and spare buttons, and pulled out the secure phone he never knew existed. Marin answered before the second ring, and I kept my voice steady enough to say, "Marin, stop protecting him." Marin did not ask me to explain, because she heard the break in my breathing and understood Graham had finally crossed the line. "Are you alone?" she asked, and I stared at the bedroom door he had slammed behind him. "For the first time in years," I answered, and the truth steadied me more than the phone in my shaking hand. Within 20 minutes, she had a private car outside, a doctor already coming, and Celeste Arden waiting for permission to open my file. I left the bedroom wrapped in the plain wool coat Graham always said made me look invisible at his dinners. The house behind me stayed perfect, untouched, almost polite, because I refused to give him one smashed glass or torn curtain to use later. Marin's assistant helped me down the front steps without a question, while I kept the envelope tucked under my arm like evidence instead of heartbreak. When the car door closed, I looked back once and whispered, "Leave everything where it is." At Marin's waterfront condo, the doctor checked my fever while Marin placed a tablet beside my tea, filled with Graham's partner list. His dinner with Russell Dane was still scheduled, and Brooke's name sat beside his like she had earned a seat. Marin slid one message forward, a note Brooke had sent through a vendor contact, urging Graham to make the split look clean before the tasting. "She is not drifting into this," Marin murmured, her finger resting on Brooke's words. "She is steering it." I read the message twice, then set the tablet down before anger could make my hands shake harder. "No posts. No calls. No warning," I told Marin, because Graham had always survived by making louder people look unstable. Celeste would handle the separation papers. Marin would pause every Verity table connection tied to Graham, and I would heal before I faced him. When Marin asked when he should learn who owned the system behind those doors, I stared at the dark water and answered, "When he is standing in front of everyone he lied to." By morning, Marin's updates showed Graham waking beside Brooke in the downtown suite, already treating my absence like a business problem, neatly solved. He told her the house was clean now, and Brooke reminded him the story had to sound elegant, not guilty or rushed. "Meredith slowed you down," she coached, and Graham repeated the line like something he planned to serve later with expensive wine. I lay under a blanket at Marin's condo, fever breaking slowly. listening as my old life began rehearsing without me inside it. When they returned to the house, the silence bothered Graham more than any screaming ever could have after everything he had done. There were no broken plates, no torn photos, no desperate note waiting on the kitchen island for him to pity or, quote, later. Brooke walked through the rooms too brightly, measuring walls for a dinner that would introduce her as the woman beside his future. Graham agreed to every change she suggested, but the untouched bedroom made his voice tighten when he muttered, "She really just left." Then the first crack arrived, small enough for him to dismiss and sharp enough for Brooke to recognize. A florist who had served half the city's private tastings declined the rush order, saying Graham's profile was under Verity table review. Graham laughed too quickly, claiming no restaurant circle needed approval from some fussy certification network with an inflated name. Brooke stopped smiling, because she knew exactly how many doors closed quietly when Verity tables stopped nodding in rooms like that. By late afternoon, another vendor delayed. Then a private chef asked whether Russell Dane still intended to attend. Graham snapped that everyone was overreacting, but Brooke watched his phone keep lighting up with polite refusals, dressed as scheduling conflicts. She lowered her voice and asked what Meredith actually knew about those people. And Graham gave nothing back for one clean second. That silence told Brooke more than his bragging ever had. Because confident men do not freeze when a supposedly weak wife disappears. Celeste's first letter reached Graham before his dinner candles ever had a chance to look romantic. It did not scream, threaten, or beg. And that was exactly why it landed harder than any broken glass. She wrote that I had not agreed to any separation terms handed to me while feverish, pressured, and alone without counsel. She also ordered him not to change locks, discard my belongings, or present Brooke as his new partner inside a marriage still legally standing. Graham read it in the kitchen while Brooke stood beside him, her lipstick perfect and her confidence fading one line at a time. "She got a lawyer overnight?" Brooke breathed. And Graham snapped that I had probably hired some desperate divorce attorney with borrowed money. But his voice cracked on the word desperate, because the letter named dates, conditions, witnesses, and every object he had told me to leave behind. Brooke's eyes moved from the paper to his face, and for the first time, she looked at him like a man selling status he might not own. At Marin's condo, my fever had dropped enough for me to sit upright while Celeste walked me through every clean move. She did not ask me to punish Graham, only to let his own choices stay documented exactly as they happened. Marin placed Brooke's vendor message beside the separation papers, and the sentence about making the split look clean before the tasting sat there like a fingerprint. I felt anger rise, but Celeste tapped the page once and reminded me, "This is stronger quiet." By sunset, Verity Table had paused every pending connection tied to Graham, and Marin confirmed Russell Dane still planned to attend the dinner. Graham believed expensive wine, polished plates, and Brooke's smile could make people forget the woman he had thrown out sick. I told Marin not to warn him, because men like Graham only respected a room after the room stopped clapping. When she asked whether I wanted him informed about who owned the system behind those closed doors, I looked at the legal folder and answered, "Not yet." The tasting dinner began in my dining room, where Graham used candles, polished silver, and borrowed confidence to make the stolen evening look tasteful to strangers. From Marin's condo, I received updates instead of faces, but every detail arrived clean enough to rebuild the room in my head completely, chair by chair. Brooke wore cream. Graham poured wine too generously, and Russell Dane sat through the first course without offering his usual investor smile to either of them. Graham lifted his glass and called the night a new chapter, while Brooke touched his sleeve and murmured, "Dead weight finally leaves room for growth." That sentence reached me through Marin's message, and I stared at it until my fever felt weaker than my patience inside that quiet room. Russell set down his fork softly, the kind of quiet movement that turns a dinner table into something colder than court without raising a voice. He asked when I had received counsel, and Graham blinked once before Brooke reached for water like the room had overheated around her perfect smile. "Meredith is handling things emotionally," Graham answered. But Russell already knew Celeste's letter had marked the timeline with cleaner ink than excuses ever could. Then Russell asked whether a feverish wife, an overnight agreement, and a replacement dinner sounded like stability to him in any respectable partnership. Brooke smiled too brightly and tried to save the room by praising the menu, the house, and the summer concept Graham wanted funded. Russell looked at her and asked whether her vendor note about making the split look clean before the tasting belonged to that concept as well. For one long second, nobody touched a glass, and the silence did what shouting never could have done inside that dining room. Graham muttered that private matters had nothing to do with restaurant investment. But Russell replied, "Trust is the whole table." Graham. Marin arrived then. Not loud. Not dramatic. Carrying one sealed notice and the calm that makes guilty people speak first in public. By the time Graham whispered my name, after Verity Table paused every connection tied to him, the room understood I had stopped opening doors for him, and not one guest reached to reopen them. After Russell left, Brooke stopped treating the dinner like a misunderstanding and began studying Graham like a bad investment, losing value in real time. Marin told me while Celeste reviewed the messages, because Brooke's first instinct was not love, panic, or shame. She called clients before midnight, claiming Graham had hidden facts from her, as if her own note had never existed. Graham kept calling me, but Celeste answered with procedure, and every voicemail made him sound smaller. By morning, Brooke had packed the clothes she had scattered through my bedroom and dragged her luggage across the entryway Graham had promised her. "I am not ruining my name for a man who cannot keep one room believing him." She cut through his begging. Graham promised he could fix Russell. Fix Verity Table. Fix me. But each word proved he owned nothing he had sold her. Brooke looked at the dying flowers and whispered, "You sold me power, Graham, and all you had was borrowed access." Her damage arrived before her car did. Clean and private, the way serious reputations collapse in that world. 2 chefs canceled consultations. 1 hospitality client requested clarification, and Verity Table's review notice made her brand feel radioactive. Brooke tried to blame Graham, but Marin's saved message showed her urging him to make the split look clean before the tasting. That sentence followed harder than gossip, because it proved she had not wandered into my marriage. She had helped stage the exit. Graham stayed in the house after she left, surrounded by candles, cold plates, and a table set for people who no longer trusted him. He called again, softer this time, saying my name like a door he could still knock open with regret. I did not answer, because the man who threw me out sick now needed the quiet he mistook for weakness. From Marin's window, I watched the water darken and let him sit inside the first room he could not talk his way out of. The meeting took place 2 days later in Verity Table's private conference room, where nobody raised a voice because the documents already did enough speaking. I walked in beside Celeste and Marin, wearing a cream suit Graham had never seen. With my fever gone and my hands finally steady, Russell Dane sat near the window with the expression of a man who had stopped investing in charm and started reading conduct instead. Graham arrived 5 minutes late, unshaven, still trying to look offended enough to hide that he was frightened by the room's quiet. Marin stood before he could speak, and her voice carried the clean finality of a door locking from the right side. "Graham Whitford, this is Meredith Cole, founder of Verity Table." She introduced me, and the silence after my name felt almost physical. His eyes moved from Marin to me, then to Russell, searching for the joke, the trap, the small wife he could still correct. I watched recognition fail across his face, because he could remember every insult he had thrown at the woman now holding the room. For years, I had made his introductions look effortless, then let him believe the doors opened because people admired him. He reached for apology first, but not the honest kind. Just the one that looks for a cheaper exit. Meredith. Brooke pushed too hard, and I handled it badly. He began, but Celeste placed the separation envelope between us. I did not let him borrow Brooke as a disguise, because his signature sat on the paper and his voice had ordered me out. You chose the hour, the words, and the door, I answered, keeping my eyes on him, so do not call it confusion. Graham swallowed, then turned toward Russell like the money in the room might still rescue him from the woman he had dismissed. He asked Russell to reconsider, but Russell only glanced at Celeste's folder and said trust was not a garnish. Graham could add later. Celeste explained the divorce would proceed through counsel. The false statements would stop, and every partner could judge him by documented conduct. The room stayed quiet, and that quiet belonged to me for once. Completely. Alone. I left before he found another speech, because the pain he caused was mine, but the consequences belonged entirely to him. The divorce finished quietly, the way Celeste promised, with signatures, corrected statements, and every false story Graham had told reduced to paper. His restaurant project lost Russell Dane before funding closed, then lost 2 partners who decided charm was not risk management. Brooke tried to rebuild her image in smaller rooms, but Marin's documented review followed every introduction she thought she could soften. Nobody screamed at them in public, yet doors stopped opening, and that was the kind of consequence Graham understood too late. Months later, I stood in my new apartment above Puget Sound, watching morning light spread across water that never needed permission to move. Graham called once, from a number I no longer recognized, and his voicemail began with my name like a key he hoped still worked. I listened only long enough to hear him say, "I need to explain," then deleted it before his regret could rent space in my chest. The woman he threw out sick had survived, but the woman who answered men begging for access had not followed me home. Marin arrived that evening with dinner from a small place Verity Table had quietly supported before anyone famous noticed it. Celeste came too, bringing no folder this time, only wine and the calm smile of someone who had seen justice done without making it dirty. Russell sent flowers with a simple card, thanking me for reminding him that trust should be checked before ambition gets dressed for dinner. I looked around that table and realized peace was not the absence of pain, but the presence of people who never needed me small. Thank you for staying with my story until the end, especially if any part of it felt painfully familiar. Sometimes peace begins when a woman stops explaining her worth to people committed to misunderstanding her. If this story reminded you of someone strong, leave your thoughts below and share it with her. Subscribe for more stories about rebuilding with dignity, choosing calm over chaos, and finding a softer life after the hardest door closes.